On the dark, desolate roads of Nevada, one man's detour will lead him into a nightmare older than time itself. A forgotten hotel, a ghostly warning, and a truth so chilling, you'll question every step you've taken at night. Tonight, we return to the Goldfield Hotel in the final chapter of Will's journey. But beware, once you step inside, there may be no way out. Stay with me until the very end, because the last 5 minutes will haunt you long after the screen goes black. If you've made it this far, you already know the truth. The Goldfield Hotel isn't just a place, it's a trap, and Will may never truly escape it. But maybe you will, or maybe you will, or maybe you've already been there.
Chapter 1. Leaving Las Vegas. The late morning sun blazed over the Mojave Desert as Will Williams adjusted the seat of his truck, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, its low rumble vibrating through the chassis. Will had driven this route before, several times in his younger years, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the heat, already pushing past 90-degree froth before 10 a.m. Or maybe it was that quiet, unshakable feeling that sometimes the road holds stories that haven't happened yet. Leaving the last edges of North Las Vegas behind, Will merged onto US 95 North. The endless stretch of asphalt lay ahead, slicing through the barren desert like a black ribbon. In his rearview mirror, the city's noise and glitter faded, swallowed by the dusty horizon. The first miles offered glimpses of rundown gas stations, faded billboards for long-forgotten casinos, and trailers parked under improvised shade. The deeper he drove into the Mojave, the harsher and more beautiful it became. The land was a palette of copper, rusty and gold, dotted with stubborn creosote bushes and dry tufts of grass. The mountains in the distance shimmered in the heat, their outlines wavering like they might disappear at any moment. Will knew the desert well enough to respect it. Out here, there was no mercy, no water, no shelter, and temperatures that could strip life from anything unprepared in hours. He'd passed through Indian Springs, a quiet, almost forgotten community. On the left, the chain-link fences and guard towers of Creech Air Force Base loomed in the heat haze, the heart of America's drone operations. Outside a small local gas station, two men leaned against battered pickups. One lifted a slow hand in greeting as Will drove by. The other simply stared, his expression unreadable, eyes following the truck long after Will had passed. A few miles later, gusts of wind began to kick up dust, forcing Will to ease off the gas. Mirages shimmered on the road ahead, ghostly pools of water that vanished the moment he approached. Out here, the desert could play tricks on the mind, bending reality just enough to make you question what you were seeing. By late morning, he rolled into Amargosa Valley and spotted a small roadside cafe with a rusted sign that read, "Last good coffee before Tonopah." It looked like the kind of place that had been there forever. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the scent of strong coffee. An elderly woman in a straw hat sat alone at a corner table, stirring her cup slowly, as if she had nowhere else to be. At the counter, a thin man with a deep accent asked Will where he was headed. "North, Goldfield," Will said, setting a few bills on the counter. The man gave a short laugh, but his smile never reached his eyes. "You'd better get there before the sun goes down." Will raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" The man shrugged, gaze shifting toward the dusty road outside. "The desert changes at night." Will waited for more, but none came. He finished his coffee, thanked the man, and stepped back into the heat. But the stranger's words followed him like a shadow. Back on US 95, he drove toward Beatty, the gateway to Death Valley. The small town had a rustic charm, faded hotel signs from the mining days, antique shops selling rusted tools and weathered postcards, and a handful of tourists taking pictures beside an old rail car. Yet beneath the quaint surface, Will sensed something heavier, like a story the town wasn't ready to tell. Past Beatty, the road grew lonelier. Traffic thinned until it was just him and the hum of the engine. On the horizon, a skeletal metal structure, likely the remains of a long-dead mine, stood in the sand. No one was around, yet Will couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. By noon, the heat was brutal. The truck's AC struggled against the furnace outside. A lone raven circled above, letting out a rough caw that dissolved into the wind. A sign appeared ahead, Tonopah, 95 miles. Will knew it was the last significant stop before Goldfield, and before the next chapter of his trip. But as he checked his mirrors, his chest tightened. For a brief second, far behind him, he thought he saw an old sedan, maybe from the 1950s, keeping pace in the distance. He blinked, and it was gone. Shaking his head, Will tightened his grip on the wheel. The desert, the man had said, changes at night, but sometimes it changes in the day too. Chapter 2. Dust and Silence. The road north stretched endlessly, the desert swallowing the horizon. Will kept his hands steady on the wheel, the hum of the tires almost hypnotic. Every so often, a gust of wind would sweep across the highway, rocking the truck slightly, carrying with it the dry, metallic scent of the Mojave. By early afternoon, the sun hung like a white-hot coin in the sky. The truck's cabin felt like an oven despite the AC's best efforts. Will reached for his stainless steel thermos, the water inside already lukewarm, but it was better than nothing. Signs of life were scarce. Here and there, abandoned service stations leaned against time and gravity, their faded paint peeling in sheets, windows broken, and pump handles hanging lifeless. They were relics from the mining boom decades ago, towns that had burned bright and then vanished when the gold ran out. A green highway sign finally broke the monotony. Tonopah, 42 miles. Relief stirred in Will's chest. Tonopah wasn't big, but it was a known stop for truckers. Fuel, food, maybe a quick nap before pushing deeper into Nevada's high desert. But the miles between him and Tonopah seemed to stretch longer than they should. The road climbed gradually into higher elevation, the air thinning, the desert giving way to rocky hills spotted with juniper. It was beautiful, but there was an edge to it, the kind of beauty that warns you not to get too close. About an hour later, Will caught sight of Tonopah's outskirts. The first thing that stood out was the Tonopah Historic Mining Park, its wooden headframes and rusted ore carts silhouetted against the sky. Mining equipment from another era lay scattered across the hillsides, as if the workers had just walked away one day and never came back. Will pulled into a fuel station. As he filled the tank, he noticed a large billboard just across the street. World famous, the Clown Motel, America's scariest motel. Stay if you dare. A painted clown grinned down from the sign, its eyes a little too wide, teeth a little too sharp. Will had heard about it in passing. Something about being next to an old pioneer cemetery and decorated entirely with clown dolls. Inside the station, a young attendant with a mop of dark hair rang him up. "Passing through?" she asked. "Yeah, Goldfield." Her eyebrows twitched. "Huh, not a lot of folks choose to stay there." Will tilted his head. "Why's that?" The girl glanced toward the door, lowered her voice. "Some say it's different, the kind of different you can't explain. My uncle worked there years ago before it shut down, never talked about it much, but he didn't like the way the place felt." Will gave a polite nod. not wanting to dig further. Truckers traded enough strange stories on the road to fill libraries, some true, most just campfire talk. Still, her words stuck. Back on the road, Tonopah's small downtown passed slowly on either side. Vintage neon signs buzzed above diners and motels, some still open, others shuttered for good. He passed the Mizpah Hotel, its elegant stone facade standing proudly since 1907. If Tonopah had a heartbeat, it was here. Just beyond, Will slowed near the Clown Motel. Even in broad daylight, it had a strange gravity. The white, two-story building was trimmed in baby blue, but dozens of clowns, painted, ceramic, stuffed, stared from behind the windows. Across the parking lot, the old Tonopah Cemetery lay quiet, its crooked wooden markers leaning in the sun. Will didn't stop. He pressed on, watching the motel fade in his side mirror until it was just a speck. The open road called him north again. As the afternoon wore on, the desert shifted. Goldfield was now less than 30 miles away, but Will had the odd sense of crossing into a different kind of land. Still Nevada, still desert, yet heavier somehow, as if the very air carried history. To his right, the remains of old mining shafts dotted the hills, some fenced, others left open like gaping mouths. Rusted machinery, half buried in sand, hinted at fortunes once made and lost. The road dipped, then climbed again, and far in the distance, the faint outline of a small town began to appear. Buildings clustered together against the emptiness, the rooftops shimmering under the relentless sun. Goldfield. Will didn't know it yet, but the next turn of the road would take him not just into a town, but into a story that had been waiting over a century to find him. Chapter 3. The Town. That time forgot. The sun was beginning its slow descent when Will crossed into the limits of Goldfield, Nevada. The highway narrowed and the world seemed to quiet. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the town existed in its own pocket of time. A weathered sign greeted him. Welcome to Goldfield. Elevation 5 through 680 ft. Est. 1902. The world's greatest gold camp. The paint was peeling. Bullet holes punctured the metal, and a faint rattle came from the sign swinging on its rusted frame. Will eased the truck into lower gear as he rolled down Columbia Avenue, the town's main strip. He saw more empty buildings than open ones. Wooden storefronts bleached gray by the desert sun, windows boarded up, faded lettering still clinging to brick walls from a century ago. To his left, the Esmeralda County Courthouse stood tall, its red brick walls stubborn against time, the clock tower frozen at 11:42. Across the street, a lone antique store displayed relics from the gold rush era, chipped china, tarnished silver, and rusted tools that once dug fortune from the earth. A pair of locals sat outside the Santa Fe Saloon, one of Nevada's oldest continuously operating bars. They watched Will's truck pass, not unfriendly, but with that curious, measuring look small towns give to strangers. He noticed something else, an absence. No children playing, no music from open windows. Just wind whispering down the street, kicking up little swirls of dust, pulling over near a small diner. Will checked his phone. No signal, not even a flicker. He sighed, leaning back in the seat. The plan had been to fuel up, grab a late meal, maybe find a cheap place to rest before continuing in the morning. But the desert had its own plans. The heat inside the cabin was suffocating when he cut the engine. Without the truck's idle, the silence outside pressed in. He stepped out, stretching his stiff legs, and made his way into the diner. Inside, it was cool, dim, and smelled faintly of frying onions and coffee. A middle-aged waitress in a faded blue uniform greeted him with a polite smile. "Passing through?" she asked, her tone almost identical to the girl in Tonopah. "Yeah," Will said, "headed north, thinking I might stay the night if there's a place open." She hesitated, eyes darting toward the back wall where an old black and white photograph hung. Will glanced at it. A massive, elegant building from the early 1900s, its windows tall and ornate. The caption beneath read, "The Goldfield Hotel, Grand Opening, 1908. "That place is opening again," she finally said. "First time in decades. Some folks are saying it's just for the summer." Will nodded. "Hotel's a hotel. Better than sleeping in my truck." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Depends who you ask." He ordered a burger and coffee, but couldn't shake the feeling of being quietly studied by the few patrons scattered in the diner. Old men with weathered hands sipped coffee in silence. A couple in their 30s spoke in low tones, glancing toward him more than once. When he stepped back outside, the sun was a deep orange, shadows stretching long across the street. He noticed the hotel then, just a few blocks away, towering over the smaller buildings like a sentinel from another era. The Goldfield Hotel. From here, it looked almost beautiful, its 4 stories of red brick and sandstone catching the last light of day. The tall arched windows reflected the sunset, and the wrought iron balconies hinted at a time when the town was alive with wealth and movement. But there was something else, something in the way the shadows clung to the edges of the building, as if night had already claimed it before the rest of the town. Will didn't know it yet, but his night was about to begin inside those walls. Chapter 4. Room next to the silence. Will stood at the base of the Goldfield Hotel, looking up at the 4 stories of brick and sandstone that seemed to loom higher than they should. The building's facade was clean, too clean for something that had clearly been around for more than a century. The arched windows glimmered faintly in the last scraps of sunlight, but the dark interior behind them was impenetrable. A brass sign near the entrance read, "Goldfield Hotel, newly restored Est, 1908. The heavy glass doors swung open as he approached, the sudden rush of cool air washing over him like an invitation. Inside, the lobby was grand in a way that didn't match the size of the town outside. Marble floors reflected the warm glow of antique chandeliers. A sweeping staircase curved upward to the 2nd floor, its dark wood banister polished to a mirror sheen. A man in a dark vest stood behind the front desk. He was tall, thin, with silver hair combed perfectly into place. His name tag read, "Mr. Harlan. Welcome to the Goldfield Hotel, sir," he said with a polite nod. His voice was calm, deep, and oddly precise. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," Will replied. "Just passing through. Need a place for the night?" "Not a problem," Mr. Harlan said, sliding a large, leather-bound guest book forward. "We have several rooms available. All of them are quite comfortable." Will signed his name and glanced around. The place was almost empty. No sound of other guests. No echo of footsteps on the marble. "You'll be on the 3rd floor," Harlan continued, selecting a brass key from the board behind him. "Room 312, just down the hall, next to 314. Will nodded, taking the key. "Thanks. Oh, and is the restaurant open?" "Only for breakfast," Harlan said. "Dinner service will begin in a few weeks, but there's coffee and tea in the parlor." Will made his way toward the elevator, an old-style cage lift with brass bars and a polished gate. It creaked faintly as it ascended. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the air felt noticeably warmer, almost as if the cool air from the lobby hadn't reached this far. The hallway was long and carpeted in deep red, with tall, narrow windows at the far end. Gas-style wall sconces cast a warm but uneven light. Every few steps, the floor groaned softly under his weight. Room 312 was near the middle of the hall. As he slid the key into the lock, he noticed the door to room 314 slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of darkness to be visible inside. He paused. A faint sound drifted from within, like someone pacing slowly across the floor, the steady rhythm of shoes on old wood. Then silence. He shook it off, entered his room, and set down his bag. The space was surprisingly elegant. Tall ceilings, a brass bed frame, a writing desk near the window overlooking the main street. Heavy velvet curtains blocked most of the fading daylight, and when he pulled them aside, he saw the street nearly empty. The town looked even smaller from up here. Later, after unpacking, he decided to get a cup of coffee from the parlor. On his way back, passing 314, he noticed the door now completely closed. No sound from inside. That night, as he lay in bed, the faint hum of the air conditioner did little to mask the creaks and groans of the old building. Around midnight, he awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, heading toward his door. They stopped, then started again, moving past. Will sat up, heart pounding, listening. From the other side of the wall shared with 314, came the faint, rhythmic sound of pacing again, back and forth, and then a soft knock, not at his door, at the one next to him. Whoever was in 314 wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. Chapter 5. The story they don't tell on the brochure. The thin Nevada sunlight leaked through the velvet curtains, painting faint gold streaks on the old carpet. Will rubbed his eyes, still unsettled by the restless pacing from room 314. He had drifted in and out of sleep, each time waking to some faint noise, a creak, a muffled thump, the slow drag of footsteps. Now, in daylight, the hallway outside was silent. The smell of brewed coffee drifted faintly under his door. He got dressed and made his way down the marble staircase, skipping the elevator this time. In the lobby, a few more guests had appeared. Two older women sat by the fireplace, speaking in hushed tones. A man in a wide-brimmed hat leaned over a display case filled with sepia photographs and antique keys. Will poured himself a cup of coffee from a silver urn in the parlor and sat near the window. Outside, the streets were nearly empty. The desert wind blew small swirls of dust past the storefronts, rattling a loose sign across the street. First time in Goldfield. Will turned to see Mr. Harlan, the hotel manager, standing a few feet away, holding a porcelain cup. "Yeah," Will said. "Just passing through. Had some trouble with my truck. Looks like I'll be here for at least another day." Harlan smiled faintly. "Well, you picked an interesting stop. Not much here now, but once upon a time this was the richest city in Nevada. More gold than anyone knew what to do with." Will raised an eyebrow. "I figured this place had history. You can feel it." Harlan set his cup down, eyes glancing toward the lobby's old photographs. The Goldfield Hotel opened in 1908 during the height of the gold rush here. Back then, this town was booming. Miners, bankers, saloon owners. The streets were packed. This hotel was the crown jewel. Marble floors, electric lights, which was rare back then, and the most expensive bar in the state. Will leaned back, sipping his coffee. "But," Harlan continued, "like all boom towns, it didn't last. The mines dried up, people left, and the hotel went through darker times." He paused, as if weighing how much to say. "Darker how?" Will asked. Harlan's voice dropped slightly. "There are stories. Some say the owner, George Wingfield, was a ruthless man. A businessman, yes, but also someone who didn't mind making problems. disappear. One of the most told tales is about a woman named Elizabeth. She was supposedly his mistress, young, beautiful, and pregnant. When she refused to stay quiet about it, they say Wingfield locked her in room 109 for weeks. Some claim she died there, others that the child was taken. Will frowned. And people believe that. Oh, people believe much worse, Harlan said with a slight smirk. Guests have reported hearing a baby crying in the middle of the night, furniture moving on its own, shadows in empty hallways, and 314. Well, some of us think that room has its own story. Will's cup paused halfway to his lips. What's in 314? Harlan only gave a thin smile. Old buildings have their quirks. If you hear anything strange, it's probably just the pipes. Before Will could press further, a woman in a black dress entered the lobby. She was pale, with sharp features, and carried a small silver tray of envelopes. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though each step was measured. She placed a folded note in front of Harlan without a word, then disappeared through a side door. Harlan glanced at the envelope, then excused himself. Will stayed in the parlor for another hour, flipping through a tourist brochure about the town, but nowhere did it mention Elizabeth, or crying babies, or locked rooms. The official story was all about restored architecture and historic charm. When he finally stepped outside, the desert heat hit him like an oven door swinging open. Across the street, the old courthouse stood silent, its clock frozen at 3:17. A stray dog trotted down the dusty road, disappearing behind the post office. Will looked back at the hotel. The sunlight made its windows look like blank eyes staring out at the town. Somewhere in that building, behind one of those windows, was room 314, and tonight, he'd be sleeping right next to it again. Chapter 6. The knock at 3:14 am. The day passed in slow motion. Will spent the afternoon wandering the nearly empty streets of Goldfield, snapping a few pictures on his phone. The faded storefronts, the rusted railings, the skeletal remains of what must have been a proud little city. He ate a late lunch at a small diner that smelled faintly of bacon grease and strong coffee. And then, with nothing else to do, he returned to the hotel before sunset. The lobby was quieter than usual. The two elderly women by the fireplace were gone. The man with the wide-brimmed hat hadn't been seen since the morning. Only the pale woman in the black dress remained, standing perfectly still behind the reception desk, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Evening," Will said casually. She nodded once but didn't speak. Will headed upstairs, the air growing cooler as he climbed. The hallway seemed darker than it had the night before, as though the gaslight-style sconces along the walls had dimmed just a little. His room key turned stiffly in the lock, and when the door opened, a faint draft brushed past him. Inside, everything looked the same. His bag was still where he left it. The bed was neatly made, but the air smelled faintly different, a mix of dust and something sweeter, almost like old perfume. He showered, changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, and sat on the bed with his laptop, but the hotel Wi-Fi refused to connect. After 20 frustrating minutes, he gave up and switched to an offline novel he'd been meaning to read. By 11:03 p.m., the hotel had gone silent. No footsteps in the hall, no voices drifting up from the lobby, just the occasional pop of the wooden beams settling. Will lay back and closed his eyes. It must have been around 3 a.m. when he stirred. At first, he didn't know what woke him. Maybe a sound, maybe nothing at all. Then, from the hallway, came a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. It wasn't footsteps. It was softer, a knuckle against wood. A knock, 3 gentle raps. Will sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound came again, this time more insistent. He glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 3:14 a.m. He told himself it was probably someone drunk or lost, knocking on the wrong door. He slid out of bed, padding barefoot across the carpet. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. No footsteps retreating, no creak of a door closing, just the faint hum of the old light bulbs overhead. He hesitated, glancing toward room 314, the one next to his. Its door was closed, just like before, but something felt different. The brass number plate seemed slightly tilted, as if someone had tried to remove it and stopped halfway. Will shut his door firmly, locked it, and climbed back into bed. Minutes later, the knock came again, only this time, it was right against the headboard of his bed. A chill ran through him. There was no wall behind his headboard, only the hallway, and whatever was making that sound was now knocking from inside his room's wall. The tapping grew faster, more urgent, until it became a frantic pounding. Will jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and flicked on the light. Silence. The air was thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere faint and far away, came the sound of a baby crying. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. Will sat back on the bed, hands trembling, staring at the locked door, and that's when he realized the crying hadn't been coming from room 314. It had been coming from inside his own room. Chapter 7. The Midnight Gathering. Will didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every creak, every sigh of the old building made him jolt. The image of that empty hallway and the knocking from inside the wall wouldn't leave his mind. By 5 a.m., the pale light of dawn filtered weakly through the thin curtains. He finally dozed off, but the sleep was restless and shallow. When he woke again, it was almost noon. Downstairs, the lobby was brighter, more alive. A few guests, or what he assumed were guests, moved about quietly. An older couple sat near the fireplace reading newspapers. A man in a dark gray suit stood near the front desk, chatting softly with the receptionist. Will forced himself to act normal, grabbed a coffee from the corner table, and stepped outside for fresh air. The heat hit him instantly. Even in late summer, the Nevada desert didn't forgive. Goldfield lay sprawled in front of him, a patchwork of crumbling brick, sun-bleached wood, and wide, empty streets. He wandered for a while, finding small historical markers scattered along Columbia Avenue. Faded plaques told stories about the town's boom in the early 1900s, when gold was struck here and the population swelled to nearly 20,000. Now, fewer than 300 people called it home. By early evening, Will's truck was still in the same spot, hood propped open, the mechanic nowhere to be seen. The thought of spending another night in the Goldfield Hotel made his stomach knot, but he didn't have much choice. As the desert sun sank low, he returned to his room, trying to distract himself with a paperback and a lukewarm can of soda. By 10 p.m., the hallways were quiet again. Around midnight, thirst pulled him from bed. He decided to head down to the lobby for another drink from the vending machine. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a lobby that looked different. The lighting was softer, almost golden, and a faint haze hung in the air like cigarette smoke. The chairs and tables seemed newer, their fabric vibrant instead of worn. And there were people, dozens of them, men in crisp three-piece suits, women in long evening gowns, their hair pinned in elaborate curls. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter. A phonograph in the corner played a jaunty tune that Will didn't recognize. Something old, jazzy, with the faint scratch of a needle on vinyl. No one looked at him. No one seemed to notice he was there. He spotted the front desk, but instead of the pale, silent receptionist from earlier, There was a young man in a neatly pressed uniform, busy writing in a large ledger. Will walked slowly across the room, eyes darting from one face to another. The smell was different too, a mix of cigar smoke, perfume, and the faint scent of whiskey. For a moment, he wondered if the hotel had decided to throw some sort of themed party, but it didn't feel like a performance. It felt real. At the far end of the room, a man in a cream-colored suit turned to look directly at him. His expression was unreadable. He raised a glass, nodded once, and then turned away. A shiver ran down Will's spine. He stepped toward the vending machine, but when he turned back toward the lobby, everything was gone. The haze, the music, the people. The room was dark, empty, exactly as it had been when he'd first arrived in Goldfield. The vending machine hummed softly in the corner. Will stood there for a long moment, heart thudding in his ears. Then he went back upstairs without a drink. Chapter 8. The Truth in the Walls. Will sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the blank wall across from him. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. He hadn't even tried to sleep after what he'd seen downstairs. The silence in the room was heavy, too heavy. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of every tiny sound your body made. The creak of the bed springs when you shifted your weight, the soft rustle of fabric, and something else, a faint tapping. Coming from the other side of the wall, Will froze. It wasn't a steady rhythm, more like someone trying to get attention. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1. He swallowed hard, telling himself it was nothing, maybe the old building settling, but a voice in the back of his mind whispered, "It's coming from the room next door," the room no one was staying in. Finally, he grabbed his phone, not to call anyone, but to distract himself. Maybe reading about Goldfield would keep his mind busy. He typed, "Goldfield Hotel history." The first thing that popped up was a grainy black and white photo. The hotel in its prime, grand and imposing, the pride of a booming mining town. The caption read, "Opened in 1908, once the most luxurious hotel in Nevada." Scrolling further, the tone changed. Words like haunted, abandoned, and infamous jumped off the page. One story kept repeating. A name, George Wingfield, the powerful businessman who owned the hotel. The legend said that in the 1930s, a young woman named Elizabeth, supposedly pregnant with Wingfield's child, was locked inside room 314. Some said she died there. Others claimed her baby was thrown into the old mine shaft beneath the building. Will's skin prickled. He glanced at his own room number, 312, 2 doors down. The article went on. Tales of phantom footsteps, lights flickering in abandoned rooms, the smell of perfume when no one was around. Guests claimed to see a shadowy figure of a woman pacing the halls, whispering to someone only she could see. Paranormal investigators had been here capturing voices on tape. One famous recording was just 3 words, whispered in a low, urgent tone. "Get out now." Will set his phone down, heart pounding. The knocking came again, louder this time. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1. He stood slowly, pressing his ear to the wall. The sound was clearer now, followed by what might have been breathing. The air in the room grew colder. He stepped back, his mind racing. Should he go downstairs? Should he check the room? Another sound, this one from the hallway. Soft, dragging footsteps. Will crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, empty, except for a woman in a long, faded dress, standing perfectly still outside the room next to his. Her back was to him. Her hair was long, dark, matted. She slowly turned her head toward his door. Will stumbled back, slamming the deadbolt in place. The knocking stopped, the silence returned, but this time, it felt like it was waiting. Chapter 9. The night the past woke up. Will sat frozen for what felt like hours. He didn't know if the woman outside his door had vanished, or if she was still standing there in the shadows. Finally, the claustrophobic stillness of the room became too much. He needed to breathe, to move, to convince himself that this was just an old building playing tricks on him. Grabbing his jacket, he quietly unbolted the door and stepped into the hallway. Empty. The faint hum of the air conditioner down the corridor was the only sound. But as he turned toward the stairs, something strange hit him. The smell. It wasn't the faint mustiness of an old hotel anymore. No, this was fresh, strong. Cigarette smoke mixed with perfume, food, and whiskey. The air was warmer, alive. When he reached the bottom of the staircase, his steps slowed. The lobby had changed. Gone were the dusty furniture and faded wallpaper. In their place stood gleaming mahogany counters, shining brass fixtures, and warm golden light from a chandelier that hadn't worked in decades. Men in tailored suits and fedoras stood near the bar, laughing and clinking glasses. Women in long gowns and pearls sat at tables, sipping champagne. The piano in the corner played a slow, romantic tune, and a man in a white jacket smiled as he pressed the keys. Will's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't possible. He stepped forward cautiously. Nobody seemed to notice him. A bellhop, no older than 18, brushed past, tipping his cap politely. His uniform looked brand new, the name tag shining under the chandelier's glow. Will's eyes followed him, right up to the front desk. And there, behind the counter, stood George Wingfield. Will recognized him instantly from the photos he had seen on his phone just an hour ago. The sharp suit, the slicked back hair, the commanding presence. Wingfield was speaking to a man in a hushed but intense tone, glancing toward the grand staircase every few seconds. Then Will saw her. Elizabeth. She was walking down the stairs, her hand resting gently on the polished rail. Her white dress flowed as she moved, her face pale but beautiful. She looked young, fragile, but her eyes were heavy with fear. Will wanted to move closer, to call out, but his feet felt rooted to the floor. Suddenly, Wingfield's gaze snapped toward her. He motioned to two men in dark suits standing by the door. They straightened immediately and began walking toward the staircase. Elizabeth froze, her lips parting as if she wanted to scream. Instead, she turned abruptly and headed back up the stairs. Will's instinct took over. He followed, taking the steps two at a time. But as soon as his hand touched the railing, the light vanished. The music stopped. The smell of smoke, food, and perfume evaporated. The lobby was dark and silent again, exactly as it had been when he checked in. The tables were dusty, the piano closed, the chandelier draped in cobwebs, and Will was alone. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. He looked back toward the stairs. For a split second, he thought he saw the hem of a white dress disappear around the corner at the top. Without thinking, he ran after it. Chapter 10, Room 109. Will's legs burned as he climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. The air was thick, heavy, as though the building itself was holding its breath. At the top, the corridor stretched ahead, long and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Shadows clung to the walls like living things, and there it was, the end of the hallway, room 109. His own room was 108, right next to it. But now, for the first time, the door to 109 was open. A soft, pale light spilled out from within. He should have turned around. He should have gone back to his room, locked the door, and waited for morning. But something, curiosity, or maybe a force beyond his control, pulled him forward. As he stepped into the doorway, he froze. The room looked untouched by time. The bed was neatly made with crisp white linens, the curtains drawn halfway, letting in a thin beam of moonlight. On the dresser sat a vase of fresh roses, their scent sweet and intoxicating. And by the window stood Elizabeth. Her back was to him, her hands clasped together in front of her. She was looking out into the night, her white dress glowing softly in the moonlight. Elizabeth, the word escaped his lips before he could stop himself. She turned slowly, and Will's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were pleading, almost desperate. "You have to leave," she whispered. Her voice was like the faint rustle of paper, delicate but urgent. "I can't. My truck." "Your truck is fine," she interrupted. "It was never broken. He made sure you stayed, just like the others." The hairs on Will's neck stood on end. "Who?" She stepped closer, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Her breath came out in small clouds of mist. "George Wingfield," she said, her voice trembling. "He doesn't let anyone go, not if they know." Suddenly, the roses on the dresser began to wilt, their petals turning black and curling inwards. The beam of moonlight dimmed, as if swallowed by something outside. And then, from behind him, came the sound of heavy footsteps. Will spun around. There, in the doorway, stood George Wingfield himself, but not the man from history books. This version was wrong. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes glowed faintly yellow, and his smile was too wide, too sharp. "Ah," Wingfield said, his voice low and smooth. "You've met my guest." Elizabeth's eyes widened with terror. She backed away until her back hit the cold window. "Why am I here?" Will demanded, his voice shaking. Wingfield stepped forward, the air around him reeking of smoke and old whiskey. "Because you wanted to know, and once you know, you belong to the Goldfield Hotel." Will's chest tightened. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. Elizabeth suddenly darted forward, grabbing Will's arm. Her touch was ice cold. "Run," she cried. In that instant, the room seemed to explode with sound. Doors slamming, glass shattering, voices shouting from nowhere. The walls began to bleed dark stains, dripping onto the floor. Will tore free from her grip and sprinted into the hallway. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching endlessly ahead. Behind him, Wingfield's footsteps followed, slow but deliberate, like a predator that knows you can't escape. Finally, Will saw the stairs. He flew down them too, 3 steps at a time, his heart pounding in his ears. The lobby was in chaos. People in 1920s attire screamed and ran, but their bodies flickered like smoke, vanishing mid-step. The piano played frantically, the keys slamming down on their own. He burst through the front doors into the night air. The town was silent, completely still. Every building was dark, the streets empty. His truck sat where he left it, but its headlights were on, engine idling, as if it had never broken down. Will jumped inside, slammed the door, and peeled out of Goldfield without looking back. It wasn't until he was 20 miles down the US 95 that he dared glance in the rearview mirror, and that's when he saw it. Elizabeth, sitting quietly in the passenger seat, her pale face turned toward him, her eyes full of sorrow. "You can't leave," she whispered. "No one ever does." The road stretched on into darkness, and the Goldfield Hotel was nowhere to be seen. But Will knew it was still with him, always.
If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who dares to check in for the night. Asterisk sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all.